Good morning. Thank you. Haven't gotten a response yet. My name is Sierra Downs, and it is a great privilege to get to introduce this session's speaker, Claire O'Keefe. I've gotten to know Claire over the last few years as her teacher, her discipleship group leader, and was able to walk alongside her this past year as her capstone advisor. And in this time, I've watched her grow into the kind of young woman who is both strong and soft, competent and humble, intelligent and still very curious. She's the kind of person that I hope every young girl has in her life to look up to and want to be more like. This is due both to just who Claire is and to the very intentional rhythms of self-reflection and dedicated personal and spiritual growth that Claire has pursued and learned more about this past year. I'm so excited for you all to get a chance to hear more about what Claire loves today. Please welcome Claire.
December 29th, 2018. Dear future 18-year-old me, have you decided on a college yet? You're about to go out on your own and experience a different world. Are you nervous? You'll be fine. A big hug from your 12-year-old self. That was a part of a letter I wrote to my future self when I was in 6th grade. A couple of weeks ago, I read through all of my old diaries, the diaries that are sitting right here, and pulled out snippets of my conflicting emotions. Snippets such as, I don't know what to do. I feel so helpless. I trust you completely, Lord. I've stopped reading my Bible. I just don't want to anymore. I'm so mad at God. I love you, Lord. Sometimes I wonder if God even hears me when I cry. God certainly has answered my prayers. I know God is there. I know he was there the whole time. He turns my darkness into light. As you can see, all throughout middle and high school, my ideas about God and the ways that he was working were constantly changing. I started keeping journals when I was 10 years old. Since then, I have completely filled out almost 5 journals. Although there are periods of time where I journal every day and others where I only write once a month, it is a practice that has remained constant in my life for 8 years. I didn't fully understand how important this was to me until I went on my senior solo. I entered my solo with the mindset that if I was going to be alone in nature for 8 hours, then surely some amazing idea for capstone would come to me. I was confident that I would walk out of the woods with some epiphany, experience some life-changing moment, and know exactly what I loved and what God was calling me to. However, this was not the case. As soon as the car that dropped us off was out of sight, I sat down and opened my journal. I didn't know what to do, so I started writing. After each entry, I would sit and wait for God to tell me something. I thought that if I just kept filling out the prompts, then surely I would make it one step closer to discovering what my capstone should be. But after about 4 hours, I started to get frustrated. And by the last couple of hours, I was so tired of waiting for God to speak to me that I ended up just writing about whatever was on my mind at the time, including my frustrations. That night, as our class sat around the campfire, sharing their stories from the day, I couldn't help but feel as if I had wasted my solo. It wasn't until later, when I got home, that I put all the pieces together. I flipped back through pages and pages of my diaries and so clearly saw God's fingerprints on my life, shaping me into the woman that I have become. Journaling has taught me the value of slowing down, welcoming silence and solitude, and allowing God to shift my perspective. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." It's a beautiful verse, but truly believing that God is working all things together for good is extremely difficult to do. How can we trust that God is working in our trials when we can't see it yet? We often get caught up in the moment and are unable to look at our present situation from a bird's eye view. Writing has changed my mindset to view each new thing I experience as just another page in my journal. It is another piece to a story that is not yet finished, but it is one that God is certainly working together for good. To be able to flip back through years of my life and see the multitude of ways that God was at work has been crucial in developing my trust in him. I firmly believe that journaling is one of the best ways that people, and especially Christians, can step away from the busyness of our everyday life and soak in God's presence. Eventually, those pages will come together to tell a beautiful story of God's goodness. Over the past 9 months, I have had the opportunity to interview longtime journalists about their experience with this practice. I've also been able to challenge myself in my own writing by entering into spaces of solitude where I can be with God distraction-free. Journaling is not just a way for us to tell our stories. It is an opportunity for us to tell the story of God's faithfulness and see his plans working together for good. In order to understand why the practice of slowing down is so important, I read The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. In this book, Comer identifies that right now, everything is being intentionally designed for distraction and addiction. Our world has become so incredibly fast-paced. Every new invention is created on the basis of efficiency. We fill our schedules to the brim, rushing around from activity to activity. We often claim that we just don't have enough time to spend with God. But the problem is not that we don't have enough time. The problem is what we are choosing to fill our time with. Attention is the beginning of devotion. This book taught me that in order to fully worship and glorify God, we must turn our attention towards him. Comer claims that we do not know how to sit with God anymore, and journaling allows for this. Journaling is a way for us to sit and process our life with God, and, in Comer's words, slow down long enough to observe your life from the outside. Many Christians today feel as if they live without a sense of God's presence. But perhaps God is not the absent one. We are. So how do we become present? Our minds are constantly preoccupied with other things. In order to be present, we must give God our time and attention, meaning we must stop, take a breath, and slow down. This is something that Jesus valued. During his ministry on earth, his schedule was constantly filled. Yet, he had time for everyone. Jesus never came off as hurried. Jesus put on display an unhurried life, where space for God and love for people were the top priorities, because he said yes to the Father and his kingdom and constantly said no to countless other invitations. Jesus often stepped away from the crowds and went into the wilderness or the desert to be alone with the Father. The Greek word for this is eremos, which means solitary or desolate place. It is used all throughout the New Testament. Jesus was led into the eremos after his baptism, where he fasted for 40 days and was put through numerous trials and temptations by Satan. Another spot Jesus often went away to was the Mount of Olives for prayer and reflection. In the last moments before his arrest, Jesus withdrew to the Garden of Gethsemane, where he cried out, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." The simple practice of removing yourself from the busyness, slowing down, and writing out your thoughts, prayers, and convictions is such a helpful practice for us to turn our attention back towards God. If Jesus often went into places of silence and solitude, then we are called to emulate this. It is true that God works in our everyday lives, and he is present in every mundane task. However, there is beauty and goodness in setting aside intentional time to listen for his voice and reflect. In order to challenge myself in this way, I spent 24 hours at Sacred Heart's silent retreat. Sacred Heart is made up of an indoor lounge area, private rooms to stay the night, and secluded places outside where you can sit. Upon arrival, every guest is required to remain silent, even at mealtimes. Sacred Heart believes that silence is a gift we can give to one another, as we never know when God may choose to speak to someone. For 24 hours, I remained silent, with nothing but a pencil, a journal, and a Bible. The only person I could talk to was God, and all of my options for entertainment were good and life-giving. I found a quiet spot outside, right in the sun, and I wrote. I can't remember the last time it was silent like this, and I was alone. So quiet, in fact, that I can hear the sound of a bird's wings flapping as it takes flight. So tranquil that even the deer walk past me, pause, and put their heads down to graze. A fly buzzes in my ear, the wooden swing creaks, and my heart is still. I understand why Jesus retreated into places of solitude. Is this how he felt on the Mount of Olives? Just him and the Father? I should really allow God to speak to me more often. Not that he needs my permission. I just drown him out with other voices and distractions. The next 6 hours became one long, fragmented conversation with God, and it turned into a cycle of pouring my heart out on the page in front of me, expressing those thoughts to God, and then going for his word for wisdom and truth about his character. It was simple, but it was good. Boredom is something I haven't felt in a long time, but I actually enjoyed feeling it again. Of course, it didn't come without its challenges. By the end of the day and into the night, I found myself longing for community. While solitude is good for a time, according to Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone. Being silent became harder and harder as the day went on. as I wanted so badly to tell people about what God was showing me. Falling asleep that night felt nearly impossible, but eventually sleep did come. By the time the 24 hours was up, I was very ready to be with people again. While this was a challenge, it was worth every second. I felt a nearness to God that I don't typically experience in my everyday life. I was able to journal openly and honestly and have long conversations with God without the fear of interruption. I found that when I actually allow the space for God to speak, he has quite a lot to say. Practicing silence and solitude is hard, but it results in a nearness to God that we were made to experience. There are many different ways to journal well, all of which lead to a shift in perspective and an ability to see God's consistent work throughout our lives. When I first started my capstone project, I knew that I wanted to hear from other journalists about what this experience looked like for them. I had the opportunity to interview 2 longtime journalists, the first of these being Mrs. Static. Mrs. Static began journaling in 2007 when she received her first laptop, and she has kept up with it ever since. In these digital diaries, she writes about topics ranging from high school crushes to questions about God, because, in her words, even just processing little things can be helpful. When I asked her what it was like to look back on these entries, she replied, "When you keep track of your life for so long, and it is in your own language, so to speak, you can see yourself grow up." I asked her what it felt like to read back on the more painful entries, to which she said, "You can see yourself wrestling through the pages. You can see self-growth. You can see problems in yourself that you may not have recognized if you didn't have that amount of time on the page." In the moment, journaling is a way for me to get out my every thought, emotion, and question, and this type of raw wrestling is extremely helpful. The ability to spot patterns in our life that need changing cannot be done unless we are honest and vulnerable with ourselves first. When you take a pen to a piece of paper, you are forced to slow down and sit in God's presence. And sometimes the result of this is immediate. But for other people, they do not receive any sort of instant gratification from writing, which can often lead them to feel discouraged. I would encourage these people to wait for the bigger picture to form. Once you have gathered a collection of small stories and glimpses into your life, in Mrs. Static's words, you see that God was working, even if you didn't see it at the time. The second person I interviewed was Devin Harwell. This interview changed the way that I thought about the purpose of journaling. Devin began journaling after he went through a painful divorce, when he needed the space to get out his complex thoughts. He began journaling to see where he was emotionally, which, he noted, also affected him spiritually. Eventually, his journaling developed into something entirely different. Devin said that at the very beginning, it was strictly an expression of emotions, and then it morphed into where I was spiritually. And then I started recognizing that there were certain important things in my life that I needed to write down, not only to get out, but to set the direction I wanted to go in. Now, a super important part of Devin's journaling process includes gratitude. He ends each of his entries with his top 10 gratitudes for the week, from big things to little things like hugs. He describes his journals as an adjustment for him at the beginning of each week, and said that gratitudes help me focus on all the good things going on in my life, instead of focusing on what my struggles are. And that is why I end my journaling with gratitudes, because it changes my thinking for the week and makes me thankful to God for the things that he is doing in me. More importantly, he said, it takes the emphasis off of myself. Oftentimes, we think of journaling as purely an act of self-reflection. However, Devin taught me that it is also an opportunity to reflect on others and the good that God is doing in our lives. When I asked him how journaling has helped give him perspective, he responded, "It really helps me focus on what is going right in my life. It gives me a better perspective of God and what he is doing." Journaling does not mean we have to sit and wallow in our bad thoughts and feelings. Although there are phases of life where it may look a lot like that, it is important that we can turn our attention to what is going right and give God the proper thanks and praise. It was also important to me that I heard from people who have never journaled before or didn't have much experience with it. And in order to do this, I led a J term in January with a group of middle school girls. We did lots of fun things together, but the most memorable of these was when I was able to read them excerpts from my middle school diaries. This was a very vulnerable experience because they detailed real struggles that I had gone through in middle school and things that I didn't ever intend on sharing with anyone when I had written them. However, when I saw the girls nodding and responding with things like, "Wow, I feel that way too," I realized that a lot of these girls related to my experiences in some way or another. In that small moment, I was able to use the things that I wrote as a scared 13-year-old girl to make other young girls feel seen and understood. At the end of the J term, I gave them 30 minutes to spread out on their own and journal in silence. When I asked how they felt about this, one girl wrote, "I felt open to write about my day and my feelings and not have to make it sound pretty." That is what it's all about. It doesn't have to be pretty. There are many different ways to journal well, but the most important thing is that we lay our lives down as they are. God does not need pretty in order to work your life together for good. This project has shifted the way that I am continuing to journal. I'm trying to make time for quiet spaces and sit for long periods of time in solitude. I'm attempting to integrate gratitude into my journaling and reflect more often on the good things that God is doing. Every day, I'm getting better and better at writing my thoughts down as they are and not having to make them sound pretty. I want to expose my whole self to God. Every time I go back and read through my journals, I continue to see God's goodness woven throughout my story. I am confident that God truly does work all things together for the good of those who love him. I don't understand this perfectly, and there are times when I have to go back and remind myself of it, but I have seen him working in my own story and in the stories of others, especially this year. Stories matter, and they are meant to be shared. But our stories are not ultimately about us. Each of them can be used to tell the bigger story of God's faithfulness. So make space for God. Be like Jesus and go into the eremos. Sometimes God's voice is still and quiet, and we have to listen well. Don't get caught up in the lie that you are too busy. Don't let hurry prevent you from knowing and hearing the Father and investing in the people around you. Finally, ask yourself, is God the absent one, or are you? Thank you. Oh.
All right, we're going to move into a time of Q&A or just any feedback that you would want to give to Claire. So we'll open it up to you guys.
Are you gonna remain journaling in college and after college as well?
Probably. I think as I've gotten older, I haven't journaled as much because in middle school, I would come home every day because there's always so much drama. And I would write pages and pages. And now my life's settled down a little more, but I will definitely keep writing. Yes.
How long does it usually take you to fill a journal?
Like a whole journal?
Yeah.
So that's my 6th grade one. That's just 1 year. But then once we get to here, like this is 7th and 8th, this is 9th and 10th, and this is 11th and part of 12th. So it's usually about 2 school years.
How do you usually start a journal entry?
Depends on what happened, honestly. I think I don't really have any sort of intro that I do. No Dear Diary. I just kind of start writing.
What is the name of
The name of what, sorry?
you went to
The silent retreat.
Oh, yes. It was called Sacred Heart Jesuit Retreat.
what's that journal?
That one is kind of out of place. That's my first journal from 4th and 5th grade. I got it at a Staples. I really liked the ice creams, and so I just felt inspired to start writing it. And that's how this started.
Yeah, right.
So what do you plan on doing in college?
I'm going to the Master's University, and I'm majoring in biblical studies. I want to become a high school Bible teacher.
I have a question. For anyone sitting out here in the audience who maybe doesn't come to journaling as readily or doesn't find themselves enjoying it, how would you recommend just like a practical step for just trying to get into something like this for reflection?
I think journaling prayers is really helpful. I used to do that a lot when I didn't have stuff to write. I would write a prayer or a poem or a letter to my future self. So it doesn't always have to be you talking about your day or your life. You can just talk to God. I think it's helpful to slow down and really think about what you're saying to God when you have to write it out.
Claire, did you ever have to like intentionally cultivate the habit of journaling? Like, was it something that always just came pretty naturally, or was it something that like maybe it's a combination, maybe it's naturally, but also took some discipline of like, I actually no, I'm not feeling like I'm want to journal, but I actually do need to do this like for my for my own good and for my relationship with Christ. I'm
Yeah.
just curious to hear your thoughts.
At the beginning, it came very naturally, and then I think once I got into high school, I had to push myself to do it more and more, especially this year. I kind of have to make myself sit down and actually journal because I think when I was in middle school, I didn't really tell people what I was going through, so I would just write it all out. But now that I have people that I talk to and tell what I'm going through, I don't want to write it as much because I've already told people about it, which is a good thing. But yeah, I do have to make myself sometimes, but it's always worth it.
Well, thank you all for coming. Let's give Claire one more round of applause.